Good evening, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Tonight we have special guest, the other Paul, and the other Paul is a bit of a frequent flyer on the Evangelical Dark Web. This is what, your third or fourth time being on here, fourth or fifth,
Something
maybe.
like something like that, third or fourth, around there.
So,
Oh, oh, you're muted. Okay.
I have a lot of audio issues right here. So anyway, we are ready, and we're going to be discussing something that you've made some splashes about, and that's the Cursed Papist Commentary, which is I thought it was a pretty good name for a live stream. It's a good name for a Twitter account that goes by Cursed Papist Nonsense. So I think
Yeah.
Cursed Papist has a nice ring to it, and it says it's what, Jerome. Just can you hold up the title of it?
Yes.
So
It says the Jerome Biblical Commentary for the 21st Century, an absolute slap in the face to the name of a great biblical scholar saint. If he saw
and
this, he'd probably kill himself on the spot.
Jerome was the one who translated the Latin Vulgate. Is that
Correct. Yep.
okay?
He produced the
So,
Latin Vulgate. Among other things, he was basically a biblical scholar of his day. The
John
fact they're
Hagee
putting
doesn't
his name
like
on
him
this,
for it.
oh man, it's a real work of art.
So looks pretty big, but it also
Yes.
has the Bible in there, presumably. And is it in Latin or is it?
Well, it doesn't. So it doesn't have the Bible like in a set text. So like what it basically just is, it's more or less like a regular commentary you might find. So this isn't the Bible. This is all just the commentary text, but it does frequently like cite or quote the biblical passages themselves. But otherwise, all the text is like properly
Because otherwise, that might be
presented.
considered private interpretation, which is
Oh
kind
yeah,
of a
I know, I
no-no for
know. But
Catholics.
what's funny,
Reading your Bible for Catholics kind of a no-no already, but private interpretation.
I mean, to be fair, that is being, like there wasn't a complete ban per se in the Middle Ages, although there was enough of a ban that's like it's not good.
Well, I wasn't even
Um,
talking about back then. I'm talking about like nowadays.
well,
Like,
now it's funnily enough, it's actually very much encouraged by the current Pope today. I think it was as well by at least the past couple other popes like JP2 and Benedict XVI. But what's funny is that this Pope is very, very adamant actually on people reading the Bible. So much so that he put his name to this one, and that's what's so significant. If this was just a random work of Catholic scholarship, but
it
there
wouldn't
wasn't
be
any,
that newsworthy.
if there wasn't any foreword by a pope, for example, or an official endorsement by a cardinal or what have you, I would have taken note of it, but like otherwise just kind of passed by it. I definitely would have taken note of the fact that it does on the inside have the classic marks of orthodoxy in books printed under the Roman Catholic banner. So up here, you can't really see it, but up here it says nihil obstat, which means literally nothing stands in the way, or there's nothing objectionable. And then below that is imprimatur, which is may it be printed. So those two things, they're both given by the Archdiocese of Chicago, which apparently is notoriously liberal. But point being, those are official, at least local magisterial approvals of this commentary, that everything within it is orthodox according to Roman Catholic doctrine. Now, of course, that wasn't this isn't those that imprimatur and nihil obstat. That's not given by the Pope himself. That would be bonkers if it was, but it wasn't. It was just by the Archdiocese of Chicago, and as we're told often, the local bishops can err and all that jazz. What's significant though is that this one does have the foreword by the Pope himself, and not just the foreword by Mr. Francis, the private theologian. It's a foreword literally titled under the Holy See with the papal emblem itself. So this is in some way meant to be a official endorsement by the See of Rome itself. Now, obviously, you have Roman Catholic canonical, like canon law and the nature of magisterial authority. There's precise categories like extraordinary magisterium, which is like a once in every few decades or centuries declaration by like an ecumenical council or by the Pope ex cathedra, which is like it's defines something
I was going to
directly.
ask, is this
Yeah.
ex cathedra?
No, it's not. It's not. It's this isn't that, because that's like to define a dogma. This wasn't an ex-cathedra statement, nor is it even in the ordinary magisterium, which is kind of just like the regular teachings of the Pope on an official level, which do have a level of binding authority, but they're not necessarily protected from all error. This isn't even in that. This wasn't like promulgated by the Pope, like and then put into like the official acts of the Roman See, but just at least on its face, just taken in practical terms, this still was a foreword written in the name of the Holy See of Rome. And so even if it doesn't fit in the regular categories of Roman magisterial authority, this still is just prima facie an official endorsement from Rome itself, which is bad enough, really.
Right. I don't know how a normal person is supposed to take it as anything other than that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is commended to regular Catholics in the foreword, and I think maybe also in the introduction as well, from memory.
And
So,
he's
yeah,
using his Pope name as on the letterhead.
yeah. Not just yeah. Not only does he just use his Pope name, like he uses Francis at like the very subscript at the end of it. But yeah, the very title, the very head title itself above the foreword is the Holy See. That's even more obvious.
So normie Catholic and even beyond that is going to assume that this is more or less endorsed or sponsored at the very, least, but I guess at the
Hmm.
most would be, this is what is official. That would be the most, but at very least it's endorsed or sponsored.
Yes, yeah, definitely. At minimum, it's a honestly, I would. There's no other way to put it than just an official endorsement. Like if a if a king sends you a letter, let's say his official regnal name is like let's say Charles III. Charles III. But let's say that was just his regnal name, and his normal name was like Greg or something. And then let's say he writes a letter, and it's just like, "Hey Bob, I hope you're going well. Regards, Greg." So he's just writing as Greg, right? Not as the king. But the same guy sends the same man a letter from His Eminence Charles III, right? And he gives the actual seal of the king as well. Ipso facto, that is a letter being sent from the king, ex officio, from his office. Same logic, just apply it here. Holy See with the Vatican emblem by Pope Francis. This is, again, even if it doesn't fit in the official in the regular categories of the magisterium, which I'm not saying, I never have said it does. Even if it doesn't, it still is prima facie an official endorsement. So I mean, yeah.
All right, so that is the significance of this commentary, and this is an evangelical Christian news gathering and commentary channel. So we don't weigh into things outside of evangelicalism all that much. We don't even stray into Methodism that much either. But this was one of those things that did make a larger splash. You got some media attention from that. I saw
I
Church
did.
Militant used you, and maybe some other people did. And it's kind of interesting about Church Militant because they're kind of like the anti-Francis, but then they're
Mm.
also having, Milo Yiannopoulos,
You know what?
do Bible readings and stuff like that. So
Oh my word, the
I
irony.
don't know how I feel
I mean,
about them,
in
but
fairness, I think Milo is kind of thought of as like a self-hating homosexual or whatever. I don't know, because like he's kind of renounced that, at least in word, but I'm not sure about. I haven't checked up on him in a long time,
I
but
never really checked in on him in the first place. But I just thought him
fair
doing
enough.
Bible
Fair
reading,
enough.
I Church Militant selling him his Bible readings. I thought that was too weird for me.
Yeah, that's sketch. But yeah, so that was the massive surprising thing about this. Like I did expect that this would in some way and at some time make real waves in online apologetics, because no one had been talking about this, and it took me being in one of my local Christian bookstores, just kind of walking through and just happened to take a glance over at the one volume commentary section. I see this big purple volume with the name Jerome, and I'm like, ooh, okay, interesting. Let's take a look at that. I quickly realized, given the size, I just knew instinctively like Jerome hadn't written that much of commentary. And then looking at the title itself, Jerome biblical commentary for the 21st century. Like, okay, so it's not literally something from Jerome. But then I immediately also saw with a foreword from Pope Francis, and I was like, hold up here. Okay, let's take a look. I open it up. I see, yep, foreword by Pope Francis. I decide to check out certain biblical passages from it, and I immediately think, oh dear, oh wow, why has no one talked about this? Why has no one ever brought this thing up, like, ever? And in fairness, this is relatively new. This came out in 2022, but we're right at the end of 2023 now. So I mean, it's been over a year since it was published. I think it was published around like October 2022, I think, or August. So the fact that it didn't catch the attention, that surprised me. But then it also, like, when I thought about it, kind of makes sense because, like, um, it's not like the Pope's going to advertise, "Hey, I wrote a foreword to this book" or whatever. And B, this is like a scholarly commentary, and it is commended to lay people, but it's not like they haven't gone out of their way to advertise it to tons of people.
It looks like a
Um,
textbook.
it is, yeah, it is. But it is. I'll give it this. It is quite easy to understand. They wrote very well. It is very easy to understand. That's like the one positive from it. But yeah, so I'll semi surprised, but then also not so surprised that it hasn't really been given any attention in our online apologetic circles at all. Especially because even if it was known, Roman apologists would definitely have an interest to, like, not bring it up because this is just it's a bad look at any way you cut it.
All right, we're gonna get into the
Yeah,
specifics,
yeah,
cutting into it. Yellowmoth has a quick question about who Jerome is, and he's the guy who translated the Latin Vulgate in the first place,
that's
which is
right. Yeah,
the specific reason why this commentary has his name attached to it, I would
yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
But
I
you
think
probably know more about him than I do. Like that's kind of as far as I get before I start conflating him with other church fathers.
all good,
But
all good. Francis, I think he himself actually in this thing, he actually talks about um, Jerome himself somewhere. Not sure here, or maybe it's in an introduction. I don't fully remember. In any case, but yeah, Jerome, for 5th century church father, major, very very famous and renowned for being like a top tier biblical scholar. As Ray said, he translated the Bible from a mix of the Greek text and Hebrew texts, which was kind of unique because most of the early church used the Greek Septuagint. But I think Jerome kind of used both for his translation, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure. But he translated that to the Latin Vulgate, which became like the widely accepted edition of the Latin Bible. Now, there was at least certain bits of the Old and New Testament translated into Latin before him, and those are specifically called like Old Latin texts. But when Jerome comes and he publishes his Vulgate, that kind of becomes the standard Latin Bible text. And he's written a lot of commentaries on the Bible, lots of letters and other books and other things. A very angry rant against a certain Helvidius for denying the perpetual virginity of Mary. And I mean angry. The guy is seething, absolutely seething, Jerome is. But yeah, that's what he was. Very major biblical scholar from the early church period. And his
Leviticus
name
was
was
probably
attached to
right about that one, though.
yeah, yeah. And his name was attached to this wherever I read it from within the commentary or from a description elsewhere. Basically, he was all about the Bible. He translated the Bible and he loved it. So they kind of thought, Jerome, he kind of fits with this. Let's just slap his name on it. Why not?
So I first wanted to, since you're Australian, I kind of wanted to ask you, like, you guys had a big vote this past weekend, right?
We did, yeah. As a brief detour, it's a very I'm very happy about the result, but not happy about the motivations that led a lot of people to it. So basically, what happened? There was a referendum, which is a vote
Vote of the
from the
people,
people
right?
on a change to the Constitution, which hasn't happened in my memory for decades yet.
That's how it works in the
We
United States, by the way. We have
Yeah,
referendums
exactly.
for
And
state constitutions.
people may think about, oh, what about 2016 in gay marriage? 2016 for Australia, where unfortunately there was a positive vote for gay quote unquote mirage. That wasn't a referendum, that was a plebiscite. So it wasn't in itself binding, but it was kind of like a feeler, and whatever way it went, the government would just go with it informally. But yeah, first referendum in decades, and it was specifically about whether to amend the Constitution in order to establish a body called something like the Voice of the Parliament, which would be a allegedly representative body of Indigenous or Aboriginal Australians that would act as a constitutional level advisory body. So doesn't have legal power allegedly, and that's doing a lot of weight here. Allegedly, would not have had legislative power over actual legislation in the federal government, but it was just going to be an advisory body that officially represents the opinions of the Indigenous. And what became very clear and what was exposed very quickly after the campaign first started was that it was just a political project by progressives. And many of them did, in fact, intend. There's video and written evidence of them all admitting this, that they didn't want this to just be to stay as an advisory thing. They wanted to actually end up having legislative power, just as you have in New Zealand, which they actually do kind of have, like representative Maori legislative power in their federal government. And so those intentions were very clear. And thankfully, many people were very, very loud in Australia to try to expose that, to the point where when you tracked all our polls, they started at a fairly healthy majority yes when this was first beginning for it. But then over time, it just very quickly collapsed into a majority no. Sure enough, when the vote came, and it was a very healthy no vote, and this is the hilarious thing, because the whole framing has been that, this is to give Indigenous people a voice, and the people who are against it, they don't want the Indigenous to have a voice. Literally every single state, including the Northern Territory, which is where among the largest concentration of Indigenous in Australia is, every single state and the Northern Territory voted no. The only place to vote majority yes was the Australian Capital Territory. In other words, Whiteville. That was the only place to vote majority yes out of the states and territories in Australia. So that's what happened, and it was absolutely hilarious.
My impression is that the Australian relationship with the Aborigines is wild. It's not really like any other. It's not like Americans and Native Americans. It's not like that at all. Like, I hear there's a lot more wild stories, and something about not sleeping on the road, and like a lot of, paddy wagon type services and stuff like that. Like, that's kind of my impression.
I mean, it's a very, very, very rocky relationship at best. And our Indigenous, as far as I'm aware, kind of similar to your Native Americans, but a lot of them are like very, very low socioeconomically on the ladder. Very bad conditions. Many of them just don't adapt well to the society. They can unfortunately commit a lot of crime. There was actually in Sydney, where I am, there's a pretty notorious riot called the Everleigh Street riots in Redfern, which was basically an entire street of indigenous housing just up in flames from rioting. So that was pretty notorious for that. But otherwise, you'll hear other Indigenous at the same time, including elders, who are like, because this will all be taken advantage of by progressive politics to say, hey, look, see, we need to do all this progressive stuff to make things gooder and with the Indigenous. But then you'll have many Indigenous figures themselves, including elders, who are like, no, we don't want your progressive crap. That's not how we're gonna get these problems fixed. But anyway, commentary again.
Insert "why are you gay" meme. But last question, evangelical Christian related. What was the Christian media like on this referendum? Were they pushing an affirmative on it?
Yeah. Not like to the level where you have Owen Strachan going like, oh, Christian nationalism and kinism is bad. Like, not like a full on jihad against Christian nationalism. Not like that for the Voice, but so they weren't forceful about it. But yes, otherwise the Christian establishment, including, and unfortunately my own Anglican Archdiocese of Sydney, was very much for it, like public statements somewhat in a way in favor of it. But they otherwise, thankfully, they didn't make it a thing like, yes, you must do this or blah, 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 which I mean, like evangelicals, they don't tend to do that anyway. But you do sometimes get some other figures who, including one of our own public theologian, I freaking hate that title, public theologian, John Dixon. Do you know of him?
No.
Okay, Australian public theologian and historian. He actually has written some good stuff on Christianity and history. But he gave his official endorsement, like, "Hey, I'm voting yes" or whatever, and he did it, and it was just some text overlaid with him playing the didgeridoo because apparently he learned that from an Indigenous elder. So that was a bit of a larp, but okay. But then a bunch of other people replied under him saying, "Hey, you should probably not be voting yes because here's evidence that it's being used for ulterior motives for bad purposes. It's not what you think it is." And he was just blissfully, yeah. He replied to them, but just in like a blissfully dismissive way, like, "Yeah,
They would
nah,
never
yeah,
do
nah."
that.
It's just, but yeah, that's so there's a lot of that. Evangelical establishment was very much for yes, but it wasn't like a massive like psyop campaign for it, but they were for it.
Okay, in America, you definitely would see the PSYOP campaign, but
Yeah,
it
I've
doesn't
heard
really
of
work
it.
on elections as much in America. Like, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter how much John Piper comes down from Mount Sinai to say it's okay to vote for Democrats. Evangelicals are still the lone bulwark against or lone bulwark for Republicans in the United States. Anyway, I
not
just want to
wrong.
say, as we're transitioning back to the Jerome thing, I want to get a little Australian stuff off my chest because I'm
Fair
curious
enough.
about that.
Fair enough.
Um, smash that like button to help out with the live stream as we continue to grow the stream. So anyway, and I will be interacting with chat both on YouTube and Rumble and maybe Twitch if you send them in on Twitch, if anyone's ever on Twitch. So that said, Jerome. So let's start off with the papal commentary because I guess that's like the first place to start off with. Is it innocuous? And is this like the innocuous opener to lead you into it, or are there some problems with the Pope's commentary or the
The
Pope's
the
forward?
the Pope's forward. It's pretty like if you have no idea about the content of the commentary itself, it's pretty innocuous and like positive, really. He just speaks about how like the important thing is he directly names the Jerome biblical commentary itself. So it's not like just some vague text that they decided to paste in here. It was literally, and they say it in the intro, they got the Pope's permission to have his forward here. Um, so he just talks about how the church values the word of God, basically, and people should read it. And I'm encouraging people to read the word of God. And he basically points to the Jerome biblical commentary as it's very important, actually. Very important, actually, how he articulates it. He says, "Quote: It is now common for the Christian community to set aside moments to reflect on the great importance of the Word of God for everyday living. The various local churches have undertaken a wealth of initiatives to make the sacred scripture more accessible to believers, to increase their gratitude for so great a gift, and to help them to strive daily to embody and bear witness to its teachings. This new Jerome biblical commentary, composed by an international team of Catholic scholars, is further evidence of this important movement within the church." So, note that. He's not just saying this is just a bunch of Catholic scholars interacting with the world. He is saying that there is a positive, important movement within the church, and this commentary is part of that. So this is for Francis. This is an in-house, in-church work, which is very important and very frightening once you actually see the content within it. So yeah, that's basically the foreword. It's not a huge amount, nothing crazy, but it's kind of like sodium on its own. It's like innocuous, but then once you mix it with water, or in this case, the content of the commentary.
How many people in the audience know their chemistry? Um, Gotta watch your Breaking Bad.
Yeah, exactly. Watch Breaking Bad. That's chemistry 101.
So, covalent bonds.
Jesse, we need to cook.
So, okay, so where do we begin tackling this giant commentary that you've obviously read? We got a question about how many
Not the whole thing, of
Jesuits
course.
were involved with writing this. And I think that's actually good to talk about because we haven't talked about the who really wrote this commentary.
So, I haven't gone into like whether there were Jesuit backgrounds for the scholars who commented. I think that's mattering a lot less now that the liberalism of Rome is kind of spreading all over the place. But Pope Francis himself, a Jesuit, gave the foreword. So we can point to that. But also my friend, Pilgrim Theology, that's his Substack. We work together. I'm about to publish my own blog post on this commentary specifically. But when I brought it to his attention, he decided to look at the first edition, which came out in 1968. And that was endorsed by a Jesuit cardinal and by a number of other Jesuits. And he himself was extremely influential in the Roman magisterium. So from the beginning, this project has been very heavily Jesuit influenced for a very long time. And of course, now you have a Jesuit Pope himself giving the foreword. And so yeah, I can say that there's definitely fundamental Jesuit influence in this commentary and its prior iterations from which it's inspired. Yeah, that's pretty much that. Otherwise, I haven't looked into how many of the contributors themselves are. Actually, no, we can look here because they'll often, if they're like a Jesuit priest or something, they'll have SJ after their name. So I can already see here the chapter on the Bible and ethics is written by James F. Keenan, SJ, Society of Jesus, aka Jesuits. We have the commentary on 2 Thessalonians written by Scott N. Brodeur, SJ. Second Corinthians commentary written by Maria Pasciuzzi, CSJ. I think that's probably a Jesuit thing. I'm not totally certain. Yeah, we've got actually a few of them here. So that's interesting. But I think the content itself is spicy.
There's like at least 4 different types of Catholics, and I'm not super familiar with all of them. But I know a little bit about Jesuit history, mostly their time in Japan. It caused them trouble in Japan. And actually, it was the Protestants that came to Japan and caused trouble. The Dutch. But that being said, so where do we begin to crack open this nut?
Where do you want to begin?
I haven't read it, so I'm not.
Think of any biblical passage that is spicy on current social issues.
Let's start with Genesis creation account. Where do they? That's when I wanted to do my breakdown of the Gospel Coalition's commentary. I started with Genesis.
Oh,
because I knew like Tim Keller's like theistic evolutionist. How wild is this going to be? So
I made sure to check the Genesis commentary, and mate, you are in for a freaking treat. I'm telling you right now, right from the start. Where's the actual start page? It actually starts like a few hundred pages.
I know the man, what's it called? The commentary on for the Gospel Coalition on was it 1 Corinthians 6 doesn't really want to get into the whole effeminacy as a sin thing, which a lot of Bible translations don't want to do that anymore.
Okay, so the Genesis commentary, it gets off to a wild start just with the author. So the actual author of the commentary on Genesis is Roman Catholic scholar Mark S. Smith. And if anyone knows about him, he's the guy who wrote a whole book about how in the earliest times in Israel, Yahweh and El were 2 separate gods who were later combined in the Bible. Yeah.
So we got a Trinitarian, or not. I don't even know if you want to go Trinitarian, but this guy is a polytheist.
I mean, so he's not himself a polytheist. He is actually a meaningful, like a devout Catholic, but that's his take, his higher critical take on the Bible. Now, here he is, after a bunch of preamble on chronology and authorship and what have you, and you can guess the opinion on authorship. But right at the start, the very opening words of the commentary on the text itself, it says the following. For many scholars, Genesis 1-2 originally consisted of 2 separate parallel accounts consisting of Genesis 1:1 to 2:3 and 2:4b to 24. Accordingly, humanity is created first in 1:26 to 28, and then again in 2:7. In context, the 2 creation accounts have been linked to forge a new whole or secondary unity. The first account focuses on the heavens and the earth. In the contrast, the second describing the making of the heavens and the earth. The 2 are tied together by a reversal of word order. forming a chiasm, a crossing pattern of two sets of words, so on and so forth. He basically he points out that common scholarly opinion, but he basically says something which is actually not. It's all right. It's two distinct accounts, but they're not separate. They work together. It's like one is more general, and then the other one goes into more specificity on the creation account. Now, the second paragraph is where it gets fun.
Oh.
The very first word of Genesis, Bereshit, literally in beginning of, is not a prepositional phrase in the beginning, as often rendered. It starts a when clause, a temporal clause, quote, when at first God created the heavens and the earth, unquote. Such when clauses, followed by then clauses, here probably in verse 3, are known in other major literary works, so on and so forth. Verse 1 tells the time of creation, a divine process that does not commence until verse 3. The waters in verse 2 are already present at the beginning of God's creation. Thus, contrary to popular belief, Genesis 1 does not narrate the absolute beginning of everything. Second paragraph of the commentary, ladies and gentlemen.
And is it going to argue that there's death before the fall after that? Is it going to argue that
probably? I haven't checked that. I mean, if there's so much text to honestly go through, I don't know where he would commentate on whether this is like a science. Like I can almost tell for certain he would say that Genesis wasn't meant as a scientific text, but
that's what the Gospel Coalition said.
Yeah, but that is conjecture. But like knowing Mark S. Smith, his worldview, his commentary on what he's actually said so far, that's more than likely his opinion. What's another passage you want to look at? Spicy for social issues.
We had the other Philip asking for the clobber passages.
The clobber passages. Let's go there. And you know what's even funnier about the quote-unquote clobber passages? Man, I am so good at flicking through books to get to right to the place I need to, even when they're massive like this. It should be right about...
And we got 6 or something, according to...
Here we go. It's funny that Philip mentions the clobber passages, my man, the other Philip, because the author literally uses the term clobber passage.
Oh!
In the Romans commentary. Here's what, wait, is it he or she? I forget. They, them, she, it, whatever.
So they have female commenters, you said?
They do. Very proud of them. But in any case, it says, the paragraph says, and this is just one paragraph, by the way. She goes on and on about this, but this is just like the main summative paragraph. Quote, because the pericope in Romans 1:24 to 27 has been used as a, quote, clobber text to denigrate persons with same-sex orientation, it is worth reminding the reader that such a use strips the text of its social and historical context and brings it to bear on an issue Paul's own audience would never have imagined or understood. Paul's contemporaries would have been familiar with multiple types of exploitative sexual relationships, including pedophilia, prostitution, and slavery. In each case, such relationships reveal and inscribe abusive power structures. They have nothing to do with loving sexual relationships between consenting adults. Whatever contemporary moral arguments one wants to mount about same-sex relations, it is ethically irresponsible to use this passage in Romans 1 to close off contemporary explorations of the issues. Endorsed by the Pope, ladies and gentlemen.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I believe on a
straight
past
up 1946 movie. Straight up.
I believe in a past live stream, it might have been you that said that the Catholic Church might go pro-gay before they allow women pastors or priests in their case.
I might have, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was you that said that, because it was like, can we name a single denomination that went pro-gay before it went or women pastors? And it's like the Catholic Church might be that one. Because I think we did something.
I don't know if I mentioned it then, but I have mentioned it elsewhere that is actually the case in certain Anglo-Catholic parishes and sects. So like Anglo-Catholic, those who don't know, basically Anglican, but like they're Romanists in the vast majority of their theology. So popeless Catholics, you can think of it like that. A lot of them, of course, are very, very traditional. So anti-same-sex marriage across the board. But there are portions of the Anglo-Catholic tradition, if you will, that are super trad, very high mass, so to speak, high quasi-Romanist theology. But there are some of them who nonetheless are either pro-women's ordination or they're against women's ordination but pro homosexual marriage. That does exist. That really does exist. And so I think it was on that basis where I probably said that the Roman Church will probably go pro-gay before pro-women's ordination. But it's actually kind of a tight race
It is
because
a
of the
tight
current
race.
synod. It's because the synod on synodality right now is very much exploring the issue of women deacons, and not simply deaconesses in the ancient church sense of like a separate order from deacons proper, but literally ordained female deacons. That is being discussed. So it is a tight race.
Very tight. So along those lines, other clobber passages include 1 Corinthians 6:9. Be
I
curious
can I can tell
what
you
you
ahead of time, I actually checked that one as well. What's funny is that the author just kind of ignores the homosexuality part in it. He just, the commentator just says, well, Paul's saying that there's these various sins
So
and they
he
won't
goes
inherit.
the Eugene Peterson route on that.
They just
It's
kind of
just
gloss over it.
promiscuity.
No, no,
Eh,
no, not even that. No, no, here's the thing. He doesn't even comment on that bit at all. Um, the author just, I don't know if it's a he or she, but for the sake of it, he just says Paul lists a bunch of sins and they're not going to inherit the kingdom of God, but he doesn't specifically talk about most of those sins. The commentator, that is, including the one of homosexuality. So it doesn't make any comments on it at all, which is so it kind of seems like he just kind of glosses over it to avoid controversy. Seems like it.
and and you gotta, I remember, Calvin's commentary, which calls homosexuality the worst sin of that list, I think. Uh,
Makes sense.
I just think that, it was a different time back then.
I mean, hey, it makes sense because, like, Tertullian himself, I've been looking at looking for some quotes on natural relations in the Church Fathers, and Tertullian himself says basically that a crime against nature is a crime against God.
Interesting. First Timothy 2, since we're on the topic of comparing how it views, the Catholic Church on homosexuality versus female pastors, are they going to deny the creationist, the creation appeal to creation that Paul uses in First Timothy 2?
Let's find out. You're gonna love this too. So it's under the subtitle "Decorum in Prayer." So, chapter 2, verses 8 to 15. The instructions for men focus on a suitable frame of mind. For women, the restrictions are more stringent. Not only must they be modest and simple in attire, but they must keep silent during instruction, presumably in the assembly. This is justified by the man's temporal priority in creation and the woman's priority in sinning. So the author is actually granting the mainstream take in the passage. But see what the author keeps to say. With a grudging concession that a woman can be saved by childbearing and modesty. Grudging concession. Such relegation of women agrees with the surface meaning of Paul in 1 Corinthians 14, 34 to 35, see the commentary there, but is hardly consonant with the important part played by women in the Pauline communities. The deacon Phoebe, deacon, not deaconess, Phoebe, carried the letter to the Romans, Romans 16:1. Priscilla played her part as a catechist with her husband, Romans 16:3, Acts 18:2, and 27. And several other women in the Roman churches are congratulated for their hard work for the community. Such prominence of women was not abnormal in the Jewish communities of the diaspora, for several funerary inscriptions of this period exist on which women are named as the, quote, president of the synagogue. The author here is considerably more repressive of women than the Paul of the earlier letters. The instructions are not the last word for the changed social environment for today.
So
Woo!
the author here, is that referring to the author of First Timothy?
The author of First Timothy. Do you want me to read
It is
about
not
that?
Paul, is what that's saying.
Shall I go to the introduction on the Timothy commentary?
Yes, because what that's arguing is that Paul wasn't the author of First Timothy.
Well, let's find out, shall we? Once it decides to get there.
Submit your Bible passages that you want to see.
Yes, people. It's basically a continuation of my last stream that I did on this. Authorship. So what's funny about this? Notice how when the paragraph on authorship starts, it almost sounds like the commentator here is like starting in the middle of an argument. It doesn't start with, it has been traditionally suggested that Paul was the author, however, blah blah blah, and some people challenge this because blah blah blah. the opening of this section on authorship sounds like it's starting in the middle of an argument. It does sound like this commentator has like an ideological edge for this position. And let's see what it says. So, authorship. It has been suggested that Paul was using a secretary, as he often did in writing or co-authoring his letters. This secretary, however, would be so different from Paul that Paul could hardly have sent the letters as his own. The writer would be an independent author. There are greater difficulties yet in attributing these letters directly to Paul. The argumentative, often explosive style of darting questions and answers, known as diatribe, of the earlier letters has given way to a flat dictatorial style in which the author merely lays down the law. He is no longer working out the theological implications of the resurrection, rather he is laying down observances, regulations, and safe traditional doctrine. The firm church structure he envisages has no precedent in the loose, spirit-filled leadership of the Corinthian community, nor in the house churches of the Roman Christians. Both of these could result from a development in Paul himself. Has he become a forgetful old man who yearns only for peace and stability? Perhaps the greatest difficulty of all is to integrate the data of these letters with those of Acts of the Apostles. 2 Timothy is written from prison. Is this the same as the captivity in Rome when Paul was in his own lodgings but guarded by a soldier? Or is it a different and later captivity? The letter to Philemon was also written from captivity. Is this the same captivity? Was he released from a Roman detention and unable to fulfill his plan of journeying to Spain? First Clement says, blah, 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 blah. However, modern estimates of the genre of writing in Acts do not accept it as a reliable history in every respect, and certainly not as a basis for a biography of Paul. Blah, blah, blah. In some, where's the summary? Some hold that 2 Timothy may be genuinely by Paul. It is conventionally placed after 1 Timothy, not because it is later, but because it is shorter. It may have been written earlier. It belongs to a different genre of writing, the final testament of a well-known figure, and that's about 2 Timothy, by the way. Reputable scholars hold that several of the non-Pauline letters of the New Testament are pseudepigraphal. Thus, 2 Peter, probably the latest writing in the New Testament, is almost certainly not the work of the Apostle Peter. This is perfectly compatible with the view that it is inspired. So there they are, trying to save face with the new modern Romanist hermeneutic. Even if the work is pseudepigraphal, it could still be inspired.
I've never heard that argument before.
Well, here's the funny
or
thing.
that claim before, even not even by liberals.
Is that this is actually being entertained now by modern Roman apologists, including Trent Horn, who I love him, great guy. We've talked, and I won't say anything further, but good guy, because there may be something we're planning. But he has in some of his recent videos entertained that it doesn't matter if some of Paul's letters are pseudepigraphal. The authority of the church is still enough to consider them inspired. So he has actually entertained that exact opinion.
Well,
that
yeah,
even if
he
Paul's
has the
letters,
Catholic workaround.
And what's even funnier is that he has actually, at least on one occasion, I've actually caught him listening. I think it was a debate review he did with the Roman apologist Swan Sonner on Trent Horn's debate with Gavin Ortland. And I remember Horn himself when he's talking about 1st or 2nd Timothy, one of them, he said Paul, and then he backtracked and he said the author of da da da. And so I think he himself may actually entertain. This is just my speculation, not making a certain claim about what Trent Horn believes, but I am quite confident that Horn himself, he does entertain this exact opinion that a pseudepigraphal work can still be inspired, and B, I strongly personally suspect that Trent Horn actually does have doubts about at least some of the pastorals. So,
but does he have doubts about the infancy gospels of James and all?
Well, this with respect to
I'm just saying, like, how Catholics, that's basically, the basis for their Mariolatry is the infancy gospels.
I mean, yeah, it wouldn't be. I guess it wouldn't be entirely different in that respect.
So with that said, Revelation 3:9, that's a synagogue of Satan one, right?
Okay. I haven't checked out that one myself. I'm curious.
Yeah, this is quite the hot topic these days.
So, Revelation 3:9.
I'm gonna assume they probably also think it's pseudepigraphal. That's a new word for me.
The Revelation of John. Let's check that quickly. Authorship. The apparent author of Revelation refers to himself simply by the name John. He represents himself indirectly as a prophet and as an apocalyptic seer, that is, one who has visions and auditions inspired by the Spirit. Early Christian writers, for example, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Origen, believed that John, the son of Zebedee, an apostle of the Lord, wrote Revelation. This identification of the author seems unlikely, since he never presents himself as an apostle or disciple of Christ. Furthermore, he seems to look back upon the time of the 12 apostles as a foundational past. A few in the early church and among modern scholars have argued that Revelation is pseudonymous, that is, someone other than John Zebedee wrote the work and wanted its audience to think of it written by an apostle. A presbyter in Rome by the name of Gaius led a movement against the new prophecy, later known as the Montanists. He argued that Revelation was written by Cerinthus, who was known for looking forward to an earthly, sensual kingdom of Christ, so on and so forth. So basically entertaining sayings.
Well,
And
I do believe Protestants have a debate on the authorship of John.
it is, yeah,
well,
that is a real
because
debate
there's
in the early
multiple
church.
Johns. I was just
Yeah, exactly. There's multiple Johns, but also it was even a genuinely acceptable opinion in the early church and the medieval church to even entertain whether Revelation is authentic or canonical at all. So that's not as crazy, but we can tell from the context of the liberalism of this commentary, it's not exactly coming from just sober church debate.
Back to Revelation 3:9, right?
So is it 3:9?
Am I getting this wrong? Make sure I have it looked up.
Section. I think 3:9, 2:9 and 3:9. Okay, so let's check 2:9 first.
Oh, yeah, let's see. Synagogue of Satan is 2:9 is okay. It says it twice.
Great. So Smyrna, blah blah blah, leadership of the church.
Okay, it does say it twice. Okay, so that's kind of based.
Okay, here we go. Members of the community are literally poor. This is in Smyrna. But Christ declares them to be rich metaphorically. Christ, as speaker of this message, alludes to, quote, those who say that they are Jews but are not, but a synagogue of Satan, unquote. The interpretation of this statement is contested. Some take and are not literally and conclude that the reference is to Judaizing Christians. They cite Ignatius of Antioch in support, who later complains that uncircumcised people, Gentile Christians, teaching the Jewish way of life to Christians in Philadelphia, another city of the province in Asia. It seems more likely that the remarks here are rhetorical and challenge the right of the local Jewish community to the name Jew. In that case, John, through the voice of Christ, is claiming the name Jew for Christians as the heirs of the Jewish heritage. This interpretation would make even better sense if Christians of Smyrna were immigrants from Judea, since Jew and Judean are expressed by the same word in Greek. The attack on the local Jewish community as a synagogue of Satan is polemical in general and a rhetorical vilification in particular. The conflict between the local Jewish and Christian communities in Smyrna is analogous to that between the movement associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran and other Jews. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's all it says. Actually, kind of reasonable. Yeah, it's just kind of straightforward.
And I imagine it might not be as different in, was it 3:9? Because that was 2:9?
Yeah, I don't think it says anything. As a key in the house of David, Christ promise New Jerusalem, soil their garments, white garments, manifestation. Yeah, no, nothing more about that. So pretty tame, pretty standard. But I can so nothing crazy about like anti-Semitism and all that. But to counteract,
Doug Wilson's gonna beat them to that.
Oh gee,
with his upcoming book.
No. I can, however, point to the commentary's opening, one of its opening sections on the where it's giving the introduction to the Gospels. And what it says, it has a certain section on the last days in Jerusalem. So Jesus' last days in Jerusalem, passion and death. And the opening paragraph, I just have a screenshot on my computer here, so I don't have to open up in the commentary. But the paragraph says this, quote, as one comes to the end of Jesus' life, one must strive to adhere strictly to what can be established solely by historical means, since theological concerns, as well as arguments over who was responsible for Jesus' death, with its noxious heritage of anti-Semitism, can easily interfere.
Hey, man, I'm reliably informed by John Hagee that Caiaphas in no way represented the will of the Jews.
Absolutely not. And hey, everyone, Listen to the real Sigma, Patrick Bateman. Just cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks.
Because it was all a plot by Herod Antipas to kill Jesus. And
Yeah,
those were his
absolutely.
appointments, even though
It was
Herod didn't care about Jesus
it
and
was
was kind
not
of
at
bored
all
by
a
him.
collective action of the religio-cultural community, and that
Yeah.
was definitely not pointed out by the authors of scripture themselves. Let's just nope.
Okay, we got some requests coming in. So let's start off with Psalm 137 9. I don't
Ooh,
know
okay.
that psalm off the top of my head. And then we also have some requests for James 2.
Yes, James 2.
And Max Creator sent in a super chat saying for 199 USD, Paul debunked.
It's over. It's so over.
Yeah, I guess that's a reference to Paul not writing First Timothy, which is a very new argument for me.
Probably.
Because as a Protestant, like we said, we wouldn't accept authorship. We wouldn't accept something as canon without some sort of apostolic
Yeah.
authorship
Yeah, that's
or
right. Like
connection, like Luke to
like
Paul,
in
Mark to Peter.
like in the metaphysics of inspiration and canonicity, like something can in theory be inspired even if we have no idea who the author is,
Hebrews.
so long as it did receive the apostolic fiat, if you will. Like if an inspired apostle by the Holy Spirit checks the work and he's like, yep, it's without doctrinal error, great, we can consider it completely orthodox and in a sense inspired. Problem is, with the pseudepigraphal letters, there are letters that are claiming to be written by an apostle, but they're actually not. And apart from that, there is no other apostolic fiat. Whereas with gospels like Mark and Luke, which were not written by apostles, yet there is evidence that they were known and approved by the apostles. So Paul quoting from Luke as scripture and possibly even calling it my gospel, as well as Mark, according to the earliest testimony, just being actually the account of Peter, but written by Mark as a scribe, if you will. So yeah, but in any case, so what they say, Psalm 137 was it, or 137:9?
137:9.
Okay,
I'm not as familiar with the naming individual psalms. I know, like, okay, Psalm 144.
137:9. What does that say? Oh, blessed is the one who seizes your children and smashes them against the rock. One of the classic atheist. Oh, your God's so cruel in the Bible. And then I'm
Okay.
just like, I don't even bother. Like the modern evangelical apologists' inclination to explain away things like, no, you need the historical context, not literal. I'm just like, okay. Blessed is one who smashes your child against the rock. You being the sinful nation. Okay. I mean, you expect me to bow to your humanist liberal values? What?
Yeah, I
Anyway,
mean,
anyway.
yeah, there's a prominent.
Um,
Okay, if you're ready.
so okay, interesting. So 137 comments on it. Nothing about that's interesting. It kind of okay. Psalm ends with a scathing beatitude addressed to daughter Babylon. Quote: Blessed the one who pays you back, declaring blessed those who dash her children against the rocks. That is Babylon. The desire for vengeance is understandable, but shocking nonetheless. It is a far cry from the command to love our enemies, Matthew 5:44. The theme remember, forget not. The theme remember dash forget dash not remember dash remember. Oh, so it's like the pattern accentuates the liturgical setting. The memory transports the psalmist to exile, or memory transports the psalmist to exile. That inspires a self curse if he should forget Jerusalem and stirs him to remind God of the outrage. So just straight up, yeah, understandable but shocking desire for vengeance. Far cry from the command to love our enemies. Lack of distinction, of course, shock and horror. Far cry from the ability to give Thomistic distinctions as Catholics of old used to be able to. But yeah, there you go. Someone also suggested Psalm 127, specifically quiverful. Okay, let's take a look at that. So what's interesting, this is the commentary in the Psalms. It's literally just like one paragraph per Psalm. So
Really?
at least for most of them. Maybe some of them have like more about it, but anyway. So Psalm 127, the two stanzas intertwine two themes. Urban development and safety corresponds to the formation of a family. God's mysterious activity continues even when humans rest. The divine benefactor, who bestows blessings as he pleases, contrasts with painstaking work and lack of sleep. The second stanza consists of a proverb and a blessing. Children are a gift from God, like houses, civic safety, or daily bread. Civil defense corresponds to the protection children offer the family in legal proceedings. The quiver full of arrows is a poignant image of precaution against a shortage of reserves when danger threatens. Okay, base. Good, decent commentary. There you go. Just
All
straightforward.
right. We got a request for Leviticus 20:13, and then after that, we'll do the James 2:17.
Well, I will first go to the Leviticus 18 passage, because it does directly comment
Clobber passage.
on the.
I'm guessing Leviticus 20:13 is like the death penalty one. Is a
Yeah,
death
that's the one
penalty
where it says
passage.
they must be stoned.
Wait, and sandwiched in between that is, love your neighbor as yourself, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like maybe
Leviticus,
your
was
category
it
of love is
Leviticus
strong.
19:18, or is it 19:19 or something?
So Leviticus
and
18,
it's half
20.
of a Bible verse.
So here we go. Quote, Leviticus 18:22-23 similarly prohibits sexual practices that do not produce offspring for the community, i.e., this is the words of the commentary, anal penetration between two males or intercourse with an animal. Leviticus 18:22 does not speak about the modern concept of homosexuality or homoeroticism, which in general was not known as a possible sexual orientation in antiquity. Patently false, by the way, but whatever. The anal penetration of a male by a male was a way to denigrate the penetrated one, to humiliate strangers or the inferior party in warfare. See Genesis 19 and Judges 19. That is true, by the way, but whatever. Thus, the Bible does not speak about same-sex love as one does today. The major interest of Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13 is to assure that males procreate offspring for the community. Hence, it is hermeneutically inappropriate to use these verses and similar passages in the Bible to ostracize homosexual males.
Well, I like to ostracize. Which, what are they going to do to all the references in Scripture that to homosexuality that aren't that? Like immediately
Oh,
that stuff comes back.
he froze. And you're back. You're back.
Oh, I froze again?
Yeah.
We are having some issues, and that was not my internet that time. So, with that said, yeah, we're still live.
I'm here. Yeah, you just
Okay.
froze for me temporarily.
Okay, cool. That being said, man, I lost my train of thought but anyway, next commentary on Leviticus 20:13. Was there anything special on that? And I guess maybe I'll remember what I was going to say.
It said it on the bit on 18:22, but if it
But what's it going to say about the male prostitutes? This is what I was going to say. What's it going to say about the male prostitutes in the Old Testament that are mentioned multiple times? Like, I guess there's like 3 or 4 instances of male prostitutes mentioned in the Old Testament, Book of Kings, and stuff. What's it going to say on that? Like, that wasn't loving. That was or it was wrong because it was prostitution.
It would probably say exactly that, because like this part and the Romans part of the commentary all just say it's not about loving relationships, it's about exploitation and blah 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 blah.
Like, Ahab wasn't surrounded by gay lovers or whatever.
But yeah, 2013, it doesn't say anything more about it because it already commented on it in 18:22. So yeah, that's basically that. But what's interesting is just how direct in the Romans passage and Leviticus 18:22 and 20:13, the most explicit passages against homosexuality, even more so than 1 Corinthians 6, because whereas that is hinging on 1 or 2 words and there's and people try to debate what it means, even though it's very clear and obvious. The Romans and Leviticus passages are much clearer because they don't just use one word; they describe the action in more detail. So those are the much more direct passages against homosexuality in the Bible. But the commentators go out of their way to specifically say these passages should not be used against homosexuality. So very clear and obvious ideological agenda
because
in
they
this.
accept orientation as a thing, which
Yeah,
is
they accept the
That's a
orientation
Freudian
theory.
concept. It's not a biblical concept.
Yeah, exactly. They accept an orientation theory. But even if we take it for granted, they assert that this just wasn't known in antiquity, which that's just false. I think if I'm not mistaken, the work of William Loader, who himself is pro homosexuality, by the way. He's pro that stuff socially. I think he claims to be a Christian, but he's like pro gay stuff. But he has actually done honest scholarship to say, well, no, Paul says what he means, and the social justice reinterpretations don't work. And as far as I remember, his own work even demonstrates that no, something that can be considered homosexual orientation, quote unquote, people with that actual internal disposition is recognized in antiquity. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the other argument that they would use it to say, hey, we're pro-gay because it's just, humanity's always been that, and it was suppressed by the white man's religion, would be the more gay argument, I guess. So they're trying to do the whole clobber passages thing like Matthew Vines to kind of split the baby on this issue, which Jonah 3:10. I wonder if they're gonna make a racism thing about this.
You want to
And
go into
minor
Jonah 3:10?
prophets.
Okay.
And maybe Amos 5 might be interesting as well.
So Job, Psalms, Isaiah. Oh my word! They actually delineate it as Isaiah and Deutero-Isaiah. That's so funny. Oh my word.
Can you explain that one?
So basically, modern critical scholarship is like, well, Isaiah wasn't all written by Isaiah. There's actually a second part that starts around chapter 39, I think, and that was written by later prophets in the school of Isaiah, quote unquote. But yeah, not only do they endorse that in this commentary, but they straight up list it as a separate thing. That's incredible. Okay. Joel Amos. So what was the Amos one?
Amos 5, chapter 5. I don't have a specific verse, so yeah, we can talk about that before we work our way left. Amos 5:25 was the passage, or I think was one of the passages. Let justice roll down like mighty. Yeah.
Let justice roll down like waters. Just 24.
Yes.
5:24. Okay, let's take a look at that.
Okay, 5:24. I was one verse off. This is one of the woke granddaddy passages.
The syntax of verse 24 usually introduces a purpose or result, i.e., stop your cultic activities so that justice flows like water, reinforcing that the Lord does not need their sacrifices. The Lord asks whether they offered sacrifices during the wilderness period. The implied answer is no, contrary to the Pentateuch. Jeremiah 7:22 denies the possibility completely.
Nothing woke there. Jonah 3:10 was requested.
Yeah,
I wonder
Jonah 3:10. Take a
if
look
it's
at
gonna
that.
go woke in Jonah to make it more about racism, modern racism dynamics into it.
Racism.
Which is kind of interesting because I heard one interpretation, or when Jesus talks about a sign of Jonah, that was also judgment on Israel, because this was a good time in Israel's reign, I guess, and that Jonah was going to the Gentiles was so when Jesus talks about a sign of Jonah, it's not just about the death, burial, and resurrection. It's also about God going to the Gentiles as well in judgment of Israel.
Yeah, exactly.
Things you learn in reformed circles that you're not going to hear from the Dispy crowd.
So Jonah 3:10. Let's open up there. Micah, Zephaniah. I need to find a page number. Jonah 1074. Okay, so pretty close.
Oh, it does have an index.
All right. So Jonah 3:10. What's that one about again?
I would assume it might be a racism narrative.
Jonah 3:10. When God saw what they did, how they turned away from the evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see what it says. The construction of the final verse is interesting in its doubling up of phrases. God saw their actions, quote, unquote, and, quote, how they turned from their evil way, unquote. God repented of the, quote, evil. God repented of the, quote, evil that he had threatened and, quote, did not carry it out. One effect of this construction is to create a sense of closure and pause before moving to the next stage of the story. Also of note is the dual use of the Hebrew term ra'ah. In the first instance, it functions as an adjective, just designating the people's way or actions as evil. In the second instance, it functions as a noun describing God's plan or intention concerning Nineveh's fate. The term is used twice more in the very next verse, which shifts our attention from God's reaction to the Ninevites to Jonah's reaction to God's decision. So there you go.
2 Samuel 11. David and Bathsheba.
Oh, yeah, I know where that's gonna go. Let's see if they go there. I was, fun fact, while I'm finding it, in school, not school, in Bible college, when I did a bit on study on the Old Testament, I think it was like Introduction to the Old Testament or something. That was brought up with David and Bathsheba, like, oh well, maybe did David? It wasn't asserted like hardcore, but it was brought up as a question from a female lecturer. No comment. Lovely lady otherwise, but she brought up, well, maybe did David rape Bathsheba? It was like a question of discussion, basically. I just had to roll my eyes as usual, but in any case. Okay, it should be right here. 2 Samuel 11, David and Bathsheba. Absalom's rebellion. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, the poetics. The story of David and Bathsheba opens the more extensive story of David's middle years. The major recent study of this story is a section in Meyer Sternberg's The Poetics of Biblical Narrative, pages 190 to 222. In the spring of the year, David sent Joab with the army to ravage the Ammonites and besiege Rabbah. The text adds David himself remained in Jerusalem. Imprudent, perhaps, but as we know, not unusual. In the late afternoon, David was walking on the palace roof and saw a woman washing or bathing. The text offers no comment beyond she was very beautiful. Nothing untoward is mentioned. Some have blamed her. She was bathing on the roof of her house, adjoining the passage. The text does not say so. David was on the roof of his house. Nothing is said of her. Some have blamed the text. According to one, like a camera, it pans slowly and carelessly from her head to the toes, voluptuously naked body. Okay, absolutely not in the text. Nothing of this kind, except she was very beautiful. David seeks her identity and is told that she is well connected and is the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who is Joab's armor bearer and therefore significant among David's soldiers. David sent for her. She came. They had sex. At this point, the text notes that with the washing/bathing, her menstrual purification was completed. She was ready to conceive. She returned to her house in due course. She sent a message to David, I am pregnant. The unmasked question is unavoidable. Why did she tell him? The text gives no answer. Blah, blah, blah. They were not having an affair. It was a one-night stand. Nothing in the text suggests she was other than dispensable, but apparently she was not. Instead, David summoned Uriah to Jerusalem, blah, 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 blah. Uriah portrayed this or this or that.
Wait, so it's actually saying that it was a one-night stand? Like, it uses that terminology?
Yeah, like he actually exactly says that. Yeah, one-night stand. Nothing about rape. So
Wow. That's I'm gonna have to see what the Gospel Coalition commentary says on that passage.
Oh man, that'll be fun.
If the Catholics are more orthodox than the Gospel Coalition on that one, because I know the Catholics aren't going to go. I'm pretty sure they've not gone pro-gay in their passages, on the clobber passages. But that's fascinating that they're not breaking
Yeah.
down the feminism other than this, entertain authorship of First Timothy debate that I've never heard before. Alrighty, we got a request for James 2. I don't think we covered James 2. This is like, the biggest Catholic verse, 2:17 specifically. This one, and I don't know how unorthodox this passage is going to be. I think this is going to be standard Catholic fare. I don't think that they're going to get wild on this.
Blah, 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 blah.
We shall see, but keep sending some Bible passages.
One moment. James 2:17. That one's yes.
Oh, okay. It's spicier than it sounds.
Let's jump in.
This is faith without works is dead, correct?
That's more directly. Let me look it up just to make sure because there's multiple verses in there. James. Yes, that's the one 2:17. Faith without works is dead. So on and so forth. Let me just whoops back to the window. Okay, 1 Corinthians.
Meanwhile, I'm getting requests for Judges 4 and the Deborah commentary, but I think the Deborah commentary is actually going to be pretty tame, actually, if what we've seen
Probably
so
will
far.
be. Well, maybe. But what it might do, it may point out how the two lists of judges, one of them being in Hebrews, or the Hebrews commentary will point out how they omit Deborah. And they may say, oh, it's just men embarrassed because a woman did something or whatever. I reckon they may do that. But yeah. 2:17. Faith without works cannot save you. 2:14 continues James's reflection on faith begun into verse 1. He begins an imaginary dialogue by arguing that faith to be alive must express itself in good deeds. Using the style of a Greek diatribe, James offers an illustration of the faith that saves. His detailed description captures the common plight of many in the Mediterranean world. Gymnoi refers to someone clad only in an undergarment and considered naked, without the himatia, outer garments. The urgency of the situation emerges from the description, quote, has no food for the day, Greek text. This description is reminiscent of the parable of the judgment of the nations, Matthew 25:31-46. The conclusion emphasizes the theme. Faith without works is dead. James is not contrasting faith and works, rather a living faith to a dead faith.
I don't actually have an issue. I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, that's the thing. No, it's actually based. Yeah, it's funny because both Reformation Protestant commentators, as well as a number of faithful traditional Romanists, have commented to the same conclusion for James. It's just a number of Roman apologists today, as well as actually some older traditional anti-Reformation apologists from the time of the Reformation who tried to argue that this kind of puts faith and works in contrast. So it's interesting. It's just, I guess it kind of makes sense because that's just a very blatantly obvious interpretation of the passage once you get to it in
I mean, again, my arguments against Catholicism wouldn't be the whole faith and works thing because a lot of that could be semantics. Sola scripture could be a lot of semantics, or you're just, arguing past each other. It would be papal authority, John Huss, and then Mariolatry. Those would be the guns that I would stick with because you can't justify, immaculate conception and stuff like that, and not ultimately attack the divinity or humanity of Christ by saying that human nature was removed from Mary, and how there's a lot of issues with that, and obviously the idolatry that stems from it it persists to this day, and I think that has a lot to do with syncretizing matriarchal cultures. We got some requests. Acts 4:32, which they held everything in common. I'm curious as to how this will go because the Catholic Church is very much about you giving to them. So I'm not sure this is going to go in a communistic direction, which Yellowmoth suggests that it will go in a communistic direction. I am not overly convinced. I think it's actually going to be pretty tame.
This will be the last one of the main commentary I do, because there's also the supplementary essays, which
Ooh.
are incredible. I'll say that.
So the Lutherans have had some issues with the Luther's larger catechism, and they've talked about the annotations and essays for the modern application
Oh yeah.
being super pro-gay and stuff like that, and pretty woke as well. But not this.
Oh man. Okay. So the common life of believers. This second major summary passage consists of two parts: the sharing of material resources in the Christian community, 432 to 35, and the example of Barnabas, 436 to 37. Similar to the previous summary, 242 to 47, Luke continues to paint an ideal portrait of the early Christian believers in Jerusalem who are in perfect unity and harmony. They are of one heart and mind in two practical ways. First, they continue to bear witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and second, they share their possessions by holding everything in common. The phrase "there was no needy person among them" alludes to Deuteronomy 15:4. Luke presents a Christian community that fulfills the OT expectation and shares material resources without strings attached, a practice that transcends Greco-Roman practice of give or take or reciprocity. The phrase at the apostles' feet appears three times in Acts 4:35, verse 37, and 5, verse 2, and echoes the Old Testament theme of obedience and submission. Once again, Luke underscores the importance of submission to the apostolic authority in the early church. So there you go, pretty decent and tame.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a Gospel Coalition commentary that's more likely to do that than the Catholics.
Yeah.
They do have some foundation that they're rebuilding on top of that an organization like the Gospel Coalition would not have. So you mentioned practical application essays or whatever that we got here.
Supplementary essays, yes. Just give me 1 minute because I need to get some water.
So in the meantime, we got some questions in the chat. I was asked, why are you gay? Because I was late, and that's been a big bugaboo online, as whether people can call each other gay or and it's not an issue. Anyway, no, I was late because I guess we're running on Australian time here. Other questions that we have not answered. I saw a question about the Antichrist. Do you see the Jesuit Superior General as a fulfillment as the Earth Beast? I am not super familiar with the Jesuit Superior General, JSG, I guess would be the acronym that I might be more familiar with. I mean, it's possible, but I'm not overly convinced that the Catholic Pope is the Antichrist. I'm not overly convinced of that. I know a lot of reformers thought that, but that's not necessarily my view on the end times in general. I'm somewhere around the historic pre-mill versus optimistic a-mill. But we got another question. Question for Paul. What do you think about people like Chris Klaus? Yeah, I'll save that one for him because I do not know that guy.
Back.
You got a question about Chris Klaus. Thoughts on him and the like, who sit on the fence and refuse to associate with a particular church but claim we are all one.
I don't know who Chris Klaus is, but for that particular class, I just kind of say, pick a side. Don't be naive. Because Holy Scripture is particular doctrinal content. And it's just a reality that once you get into that, you're going to side with one group or another over others in different areas. So, yeah.
All right. So papist commentary or
All right.
social essay or supplemental essays.
Okay. So, after the commentary, there's a series of supplementary essays. Some of them are interesting and decent enough. Others are you'll hear. So, the first section of the essays have these articles. They're titled, quote, number 1, according to the scriptures, biblical interpretation prior to 1600. And then after that, interpreting the scriptures, the church and the modern Catholic biblical renewal. And then finally, the Bible as sacred scripture, revelation, inspiration, canon. So, sound decent enough. Then we get onto these ones. Feminist Biblical Interpretation by Barbara E. Reed. The Bible and Social Justice by Carol Dempsey. Literary Approaches to the Bible by Jean-Francois Racine and Gina Hens Piazza. African and African American Biblical Interpretation by Stacey Davis. And here's my absolute favorite, Latink's Biblical Interpretation by Francisco Lozado Jr. Asian American Approaches to the Bible by Seung I Yang and Sun Hee Jun. And then finally, The Bible and the Life of the Church, The Bible and Liturgy, The Bible and Ethics, and Ecumenism, Interreligious Relations, and the Bible. But yeah, those middle ones.
So this is a fancy way of saying standpoint epistemology. That
pretty much, yeah, pretty much.
The idea, which is a woke concept about how we all bring our different lenses into the interpretation of the text, and how, black people and white people can't, they can't interpret the passage the same exact way, but they need to combine their efforts to get the true meaning of the text, because otherwise they will not.
There you go. There you go.
That's the logical conclusion of it.
But yeah, sorry, I was looking at something else quickly. But yeah, do you want to take a look at some samples within these essays?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Give us a tour.
So here's actually, I've got a screenshot of this one, so I'll just read it from the screenshot. This is from the Feminist Biblical Interpretation essay. Actually, I'll just go there first because this second bit, oh man. So page 2000, right towards the end. Very opening paragraph. Interpretation of the scriptures by women through the lens of their own experience is nothing new, but only in recent decades has there been the development of scholarly methods of feminist biblical interpretation. In this article, we define feminist, womanist, mujerista, and ecofeminist.
What was that third one?
Mujerista. I think that's like, I think that's because like womanist is like black feminism. So I think mujerista is probably like Latino. Is probably like Latino feminism or something.
That's a new word for me.
So feminist, womanist, mujerista, and ecofeminist. What? Oh dear. Recount the work of some of the key figures in the development of feminist biblical interpretation, describe the methods they use, and summarize the impact and significance of feminist biblical scholarship. So it's basically, a lot of it is like historical, but there's clearly a very positive bent to it. What's important, however, is you can often find the ideological bent of these essays, even if they're meant to just be historical, by looking at like their ending paragraph. And this is what the ending paragraph of this essay says. Since the publication of this document, there has been much more development in the methods and use of feminist biblical interpretations, so that today its description of the approach is somewhat dated. But the affirmation of its benefits has helped to allay misunderstandings and fear among Catholics. Feminist biblical interpretation has now become firmly established and well respected in Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish scholarly circles, and the faithful are reaping the benefits of this liberative approach.
So we got good old-fashioned liberation theology that
Good
the
old
Catholic
fashioned.
Church dealt with in South America.
And that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it. Here's the spicy paragraph I wanted to
Oh,
read as
wait,
well.
there's more.
From just before that. More recently, some feminists have developed reading strategies from lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer perspectives. They show how categories that emerged in recent centuries are applied anachronistically to biblical texts to make modern day judgments, as in what we were reading earlier about how they didn't know about homosexuality back in Paul's day. Some look for insight from same sex relationships in the Bible by figures such as Ruth and Naomi or David and Jonathan. Examining texts in which figures transgress what is traditionally considered proper gender behavior is another approach used by such scholars.
Well,
Ruth and Naomi.
all right, I'm out.
Stepmom and stepdaughter. Ruth and Naomi.
Aren't you not supposed to uncover your parents' nakedness?
Yep, that's what this
Like, what's his face? Reuben was cursed for being his father's wiener cousin.
Oh man. But yeah, that's
Absalom also.
that's how it goes. Yeah. That's what it promotes in this commentary, and so that's what that's what's really amazing with this commentary, how it can still all technically say that there is nothing doctrinally objectionable here. So we can either ask how did they come to that conclusion? And again, Archdiocese of Chicago is apparently very liberal. So either they acknowledge that this commentary is trying to push gay stuff and they just don't care because the Archdiocese is itself for that stuff, or it may be for it because liberal, but it's working within the technicalities of the Roman magisterial system and seeing how, look, nothing in the commentary, because as far as I'm aware, nothing in the commentary explicitly says homosexuality is not a sin.
It just says you can't use this to come after modern day
Exactly. Yeah.
homosexuality.
It says everything around that. It says everything that points in that direction, but not that exact statement itself. So technically, this commentary can get the nihil obstat, get the doctrinal approval, despite it leaning directly in the direction of contradicting that doctrinal claim. So yeah, that's just the feminist essay. Like 2 tiny paragraphs on the feminist essay.
And of course, feminism always goes into sexual degeneracy. Like,
Of course.
historically unbeaten trend.
Let's see if there's a fun one in the social justice essay. Oh, well, it's got it's got a section on race in the essay on the Bible and social justice. It's got a section on racial justice, and it's got a section on disability justice.
Oh man, I thought you were gonna say fat justice.
I mean, you never know. It might. So there's ageism justice here, interreligious justice, decolonizing the justice of God. Oh, this is beautiful. This stuff is just beautiful. Papally approved, ladies and gentlemen.
It is. And this is at the front of the book or the back of the book?
This is at the back.
Okay.
Let's take a look at a paragraph from the disability justice. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, final paragraph, because again, the final paragraph of these different essays tends to be the most illustrative. Reading and interpreting the Bible for disability justice exposes a culture of ableism which continues to be the norm for life in today's world. Ableism, conscious or unconscious, is embedded in institutions, systems, the broader culture of a society. Translation: the assumption that people have hands they can use is a norm of society. Anyway, persons with disabilities continue to be stigmatized and disenfranchised by those systems, structures, and attitudes that support ableism. Ableism limits the opportunities of persons with disabilities and reduces their inclusion in their life of their communities. To read against the grain for disability justice is to re-envision the realm of the divine that celebrates tremendous diversity, where not all are perfect in body, mind, and spirit, but where all are equal, gifted, valued, cherished, and affirmed for who they are as they are. Wow.
Well, I mean, there was the one article that said that Jesus was disabled post resurrection in glorified form. So we're going to be resurrected in glorified form with our disabilities as well. I think was the logic there.
Yeah, guys, I think I
Or
think I think people are going to be thrilled when they have cerebral palsy for eternity. What do you
uh,
think? Oh man, let's go to Latinx. Actually, no, African American biblical interpretation.
and this was the school of or diocese of Chicago that wrote this, right?
Archdiocese of Chicago. Yep. So I'm going to read the opening and the final paragraph from this one because I have read this before. Um, so for African and African American biblical interpretation by Stacey Davis. Yes, Queen. Long before becoming academics, black people read with and against the Bible. African and African American biblical interpretations have been shaped by the context of historical and cultural resistance to white supremacy and validation of black humanity in spite of slavery and colonialism and their aftermath. Contemporary interpreters rely on multiple theories, including post-colonialism and intersectionality, while utilizing cultural references as resources to read biblical texts in ways that support their communities and challenge the dominance of Eurocentric biblical interpretation. Eurocentric biblical interpretation. This introduction has three parts: historical and cultural context, theory, and practice in African American and African scholarship. Off to a banger start, honestly, every single time. Um,
Eurocentric. Might you remind me where the Vatican is located? You know,
Isn't that in Tunisia, in North Africa? No.
yeah.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
you know?
Eurocentric biblical interpretation, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, stuff the magisterium. We Africans and African Americans want to read the Bible however we want. Yeah. Now, the final paragraph. Oh man, it's a little bit of a long one, but oh man, the final paragraph of this essay is a doozy.
Indulge us, I should say.
This essay has introduced the diversity and depth of African and African American biblical interpretations. It was written in 2020, a year that reintroduced the world to the United States' unfinished reckoning with slavery and Jim Crow. The murder of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020,
Are you
led to
serious?
led to worldwide protests with African Americans and Africans on the continent marching in solidarity. The response in biblical studies and theological circles was swift. In June 2nd, 2020, in a June 2nd, 2020 statement, the Society of Biblical Literature's council and executive staff wrote, quote, "We are appalled at the murder of George Floyd on 25th May 2020 by police. We grieve the murder of Breonna Taylor and others who have died because of anti-blackness. We are committed to clear and unequivocal assertion that Black Lives Matter. The Bible matters. SBL created a Black Scholars Matter task force to support African and African American biblical scholars as they work in a world where, quote, systematic and institutional racism, unquote, remains." And then he links to it in the URL. On June 3rd, 2020, the Catholic Theological Society of America's Board of Directors issued a statement on racial injustice and state violence, noting, quote, that our church has a tragic history of complicity in the nation's endemic racism and an ability to recognize that complicity, unquote. The pledging pledging the organization of a, quote, deeper engagement in our scholarship and teaching with theological contributions coming from communities directly impacted by racialized violence, including from Black, womanist, feminist, indigenous, Latinx, and Asian thinkers, unquote. Including this essay about Black biblical scholarship written by a Black scholar makes the Jerome biblical commentary a part of the tearing down of exclusionary scholarship and assumptions regarding whose voices matter. May this work continue. Incredible.
I mean, it's worth noting that all the civil rights movement really was centered in the South of the United States. It wasn't the national issue like people really try to make it seem like it was. I mean, there was to some degree, hey, blacks and whites, we can get along now, but in terms of, the segregation issue, that was kind of localized, or not local, regionalized, I should say. And Catholics aren't as big in the South; they're bigger in the North. So, of course, the Catholics specifically aren't going to be like the biggest church involved in the civil rights movement.
Yep.
Even if the civil rights movement were as theologically sound to have been a part of as they try to make it seem, because it's not like, Martin Luther King Jr. was a heretic at all. He didn't, deny the Trinity, deny the divinity of Christ, or, preach a social justice gospel and, was a communist. He wasn't any of those things, right?
Yeah. Well,
Oh, I'm sure if
clearly
you're an American, you probably, maybe that's good. I don't know. You don't research our heroes, I guess.
not all the time, not particularly.
But yeah, he's like a saint here. He has his own holiday, but it's like might have also raped somebody or something. There's an FBI tape. They illegally wiretapped him,
But
and it's
Ray, touch not God's anointed.
they touch not God's anointed. So that's pretty bad. Was there a sexuality one? I don't.
Not specific. Actually, it might be in the social justice one. Let's take a look.
All right.
Bible and justice, racial justice, reproductive justice.
Oh, abortion.
Let's
Let's
take a
get
look
this
at that.
video demonetized. Do it.
Let's read the ending paragraph. In sum, reproductive justice is an eco-anthropological matter for the 21st century because it involves the sustainability, health, and rights of the planet in general and women in particular. Overpopulation, overconsumption, overdevelopment, and overcultivation of the land are all interrelated. The leading cause of environmental degradation is population pressure that leads to overexploitation of the land and intensified stresses on the natural resources. As more people seek land for settlement, less and less land becomes available for farming to provide food for the increased population. Furthermore, overcultivation leads to deforestation, desertification, soil erosion, soil degradation, reduced food production, flooding, threats to natural water supplies, resulting in health hazards to both humans and non-humans, and the death of marine life. Reproductive justice then concerns the political, religious, and cultural and social forces exerted to dominate both the planet through overpopulation and women's bodies through the denial of their reproductive rights and choices as human beings, especially for women of color. Reproductive justice involves structural and systemic changes that are transformative and which can alleviate all the intersecting and interlocking forms of oppression that affects all life, especially those in marginalized communities, particularly women of color and non-human life. One way in which a transformative change can begin is how biblical texts such as Numbers 5:11-31 and Genesis 38 1-11, especially verses 9-11, are translated, read, and interpreted and understood. Biblical texts such as these have been used by various interpreting communities to support political, social, cultural, and religious principles, policies, teachings, beliefs, and mores that legitimize, normalize, and obfuscate not only violence done to women. Wait, I think there's like a bit of a grammatical error here. Biblical texts such as these have been used by various interpreting communities to support political, social, and religious principles, policies, teachings, beliefs, and mores that legitimate, normalize, and obfuscate not only violence done to women, full stop. That's a...
It says full stop?
Yeah, no, like there's a full stop after women. So not only violence done to women, and then stop. so
it introduces a clause that
it's a bit of a typo. But anyway, it goes on. In the case of Genesis 38 1-11, certain religious traditions have used this text to cast contraception and practice of masturbation in negative light.
Like
understanding and appreciating, exactly, like the Catholic Church, exactly. Understanding and appreciating human sexuality as an integral part of life and all relationships has developed holistically, especially in the latter part of the 20th century and certainly within the 21st century. But unfortunately, laws governing reproductive rights and other expressions of human sexuality are still in the hands of various hegemonic powers. Thus, reading the Bible for reproductive justice is one step closer toward establishing justice for the entire planet and all communities of life in the 21st century world.
Okay,
Wow.
you should have just stuck with the Thanos argument.
Honestly,
I would have respected you more if you just stuck with the Thanos argument rather than trying to make it a women's rights thing, like
more women's rights, basically.
and women of color argument. Like if you just had the balls, which they don't have because I assume a woman wrote that. If you just had the balls to say Thanos, Malthusian ethics, world's overpopulated, and eugenicist argument, like Margaret Sanger did back in the day.
I mean, this
Because I guess she
essay.
had the balls to do it, but
So
I'd respect
this,
that. That's the best argument for abortion.
yeah,
But instead, you want to
yeah,
make a feminist argument, which is terrible.
yeah, exactly. This essay was written by, wait for it, Carol J. Dempsey.
And the Malthusian ethics aren't even correct because there's so much of the world that we could probably terraform. We, with air conditioning, we made uninhabitable places habitable here in the United States.
Yeah.
Look at Arizona. It's one of the fastest growing states in the last 100 years. Why? Air conditioning. It's now a retirement hub for people in the West. So
there you go. There you go. Still a
and,
vast
and
range
Las
of
Vegas
people.
is one of the fastest growing cities. Why is that? It's in the middle of nowhere. Las Vegas translates to the bottoms, I think.
Yeah, it's
Because
that does make a lot of sense because like if you can get water out there and if it's not on a coastline, you can just endlessly expand outwards like that. It's actually the same.
But why is it able to do that? Air conditioning.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, there
people
you
gotta
go.
want to live there.
But the big thing as well is that it's actually the same thing. So in Sydney, there's another city within within the Greater Sydney area. There's a particular inland city called Parramatta, and that's very much further inland. But it's not desert here. It's all lush, green, and what have you. And it's situated and centralized along the Parramatta River, which ends up connecting to the Pacific Ocean and onto the Sydney Harbour itself. And so it's inland. It's a major Sydney city in the area, but it's inland and it can just endlessly expand out like that. So that Parramatta is for years now and still is the city with the most growth potential in Greater Sydney area.
Yeah, and in Las Vegas being, why do people want to live there as opposed to just visiting? Like,
Gamble their savings away.
hey, some people wanted to see Elvis, but yeah, so the Malthusian ethics argument's just wrong, flat on its face. We can make a lot more areas habitable. If we just didn't decolonize the northern Africa, I'm sure we could make that very habitable. And
Oh yeah,
maybe not the next 10 years, but say the next 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. How many people could be living there because of technological improvements on the area? I mean, there's a certain nation last week that we talked a lot about, Israel, and they've done really well technologically making that land habitable and profitable for agriculture.
right. Yep. There you go.
So, and
Yeah,
water.
I've given a pretty good overview of just the nature of this commentary, I guess.
Yeah.
Because like in the areas where it's not giving crap social justice or high critical diatribes, it's a pretty mediocre commentary. It kind of just states the obvious and maybe gives an interesting observation here or there. The most value is probably in those ending essays, including even the woke ones, because they point you to resources that if you want to research these areas, you can kind of follow them. And perhaps the scholarly commentary itself, it's surprisingly sparse. Surprisingly sparse with citations, but I guess it's also not surprising because there's already so much text. It's double columned and it's already 2,000 pages long. But the last thing they really need is footnotes. But otherwise, it can still point you to some useful stuff. So yeah, there's all that. But otherwise, though, on virtually every single passage of some modern social relevance, it's blatantly either woke up the wazoo, or in the case of 1 Corinthians 6, it's just kind of passes over it.
It
and
doesn't
doesn't.
even do Eugene Peterson level of
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't even try to.
confronting.
Yeah, basically that. So yeah, and so all of that, um, combined with the Pope's own stamp of approval, basically, like I like obviously. Well, people may say, well, you can't expect the Pope to read all 2,000 pages of this before giving a forward endorsement. Yeah, actually, I would. Like, if I was actually asked, if I was the one being asked to endorse this 2,000 page long double column text commentary, I would not give it unless I've read every single page. And that could take a very, very damn long time. And maybe they'll just say, we're going to find someone else to do a forward who won't exercise that integrity and just give the forward immediately. But otherwise, yeah, if I'm asked to endorse something, I'm going to read the entire thing, no matter how
At very
massive it is.
least, you're going to check the problem passages.
Yeah, exactly. At the bare minimum, you should expect the Vicar of Christ to understand the major social controversies, especially in biblical scholarship, including within his own church, and to see, what do they say about these biblical passages, and then to go check them. Now, here's the thing: there's two possibilities. Either and they're both pretty disastrous. Either the Pope is just that negligent, they just didn't bother checking it, or, in my opinion, more likely, given more recent revelations with the release dubia to those cardinals, as well as the synod on synodality and other comments made over time, more likely the Pope has at least some idea of the libtarded content in this commentary, and he's okay with it, and he endorses it. So, yeah, either way, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad for Rome.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights with us. I want to let you know, if you like this kind of content, subscribe to the Evangelical Dark Web if you are new. Otherwise, hit the like button on your way out, and this will be on audio podcasts as well. So don't forget to subscribe there if you're an audio listener. That being said, Paul, where can we find you?
Yes, you can find me on my website with links to pretty much everything I do, theotherpaul64.com. Otherwise, my main thing is my YouTube channel, The Other Paul, here on YouTube. I'm also possibly going to be starting a Substack that is exclusively for Latin writing. So I'll be publishing stuff in Latin there, and possibly, once I get back on it, into ancient Greek. Pretty much for fun, for my own exercise, and I think it's genuinely helpful in many ways. So I'll be starting that soon. Keep an eye out for that. Lots of epic content. Sorry, that was my phone. Lots of really epic content coming soon, including a review of this book, The Annals of the Whole World, by 16th century, 16th or 17th century Anglican Archbishop James Ussher. Really good history of the ancient world. Yeah, lots of stuff coming up. So keep an eye out for that. And on Twitter as well, at The Other Paul 2, because The Other Paul's already taken, and apparently it's a gay dude. So.
Well, you don't want to be confused for that.
Yeah.
So, the other Paul, everyone, thank you for coming on and enlightening us on this cursed papist commentary. Have a blessed night. We will catch you on the next one.